Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a family portrait, and it has been a long time since we've done a family portrait, mostly because I did a lot of them very early on when I started my fragrance channel. So we did YSL, Dior, Tom Ford, Creeds, all the big names, right? And there were a few houses that I had a couple fragrances here and there, but even though the house, I think, was important enough to discuss, I just didn't have enough fragrances to make it into a family portrait, if that makes sense. So finally, this house has grown in scope, and I have to give a special shout out to my brother Frank for helping me complete my Halston collection. Well, to be fair, it's not even complete yet, as there's still a couple more that I would like to add to the collection. But we have enough now that I feel comfortable doing a Halston family portrait. And here's the thing about Halston. Speaking from a man in his late 30s, this is a little bit of a sad episode for me because every single fragrance we're going to talk about today, every single one, even the newer ones from the 2000s, late 90s, everything shows discontinued on Parfumo. Even their most classic fragrances like Z-14 and 112 all show discontinued. So I think Halston as a house is operating in very limited capacity. I don't know what in the world is going on with the house. If it's being, I don't think it's being dissolved, but I just don't see anything in the fragrance world, which is sad. You know, even the newer stuff that Carlos Benaim made, like Halston Man from 2010, discontinued. So it's a little bit of a sad family portrait. But on the other side, there's a celebratory side. See, this house is almost like a tale of two companies for me. Because it's a house that I really think deserves to be discussed because of just the mark, you know, the stamp that the man made on fashion, fragrance. He was just an absolute icon, in my opinion. And there's a beautiful documentary on him. Came out a couple years ago, I believe. I would urge you to go check that out if you really want to know more about Roy Halston Fragrances. But we'll talk a little bit about the backstory. But it's a story of a man and a company, I think, that kind of went through this split, you know, a chasm, if you will. One of my favorite Chinese proverbs is, you cannot leap a chasm in 2 bounds. And to me, this is a little bit of almost like a, as an outsider kind of looking in, it seems like there's this great dichotomy between the Halston that I grew up as a kid seeing, and basically I found their bottles at TJ Maxx for $9, you know, and everyone viewed Halston as almost like a cheaper house. They were promotions with NASCAR riders and you would get like $20 and the aftershave and stuff like that, right? It was seen as like a cheaper house, but that's because of decisions that were made decades ago. Originally, they were not seen as a cheap house. In fact, they were seen as kind of one of the high-end fashion icons. Like I said, finding their fragrances at TJ Maxx in Burlington for $9 was, I think, an absolute travesty. And, you know, it's all about in how people see you, how you're perceived, the perception of your brand. And I think he made the fatal error of signing a deal with JCPenney in the early 1980s to try to bring kind of high-end fashion to the masses. And I think it really backfired on him, because I don't think that those type of houses, you know, you can't have this duality. It's very hard for somebody to want to pay $500 for a Dior t-shirt and then see a Dior product at JCPenney's, right? It just, they don't go hand in hand, is what ended up happening to Halston, in my opinion. And getting to know more of his backstory, it almost seems like in sort of like a nutshell, you're kind of viewing the rise and fall of America in this one fashion house, if you will. So, but let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about the man himself. So Roy Halston Fragrances was born in Des Moines, Iowa. April of 1932, he passed away in March of 1990 of AIDS or AIDS-related cancer, autoimmune disease, whatever you want to call it. His mother used to correct people when he would introduce himself as Halston. She would say his family name is Halston, but Halston is a force to be reckoned with in you know, the business sense. But she used to claim that his correct pronunciation was Halston. And so, in my opinion, from what I've seen, one of the most influential designers of all time, not just American designers. It's not fair to say he was one of the most influential American designers, because while he was up there, I think, with the most influential American designers, you could put him and Ralph Lauren easily. Polo Green is definitely going to get a Vintage Hall of Fame review on the channel. This is sort of iconic, one of the most iconic piney fragrances of all time for men. One of the most masculine fragrances. I've often said what a man should smell like. And Polo Crest, just another example. I just grabbed a couple Polos, but these two will be getting reviews on the channel very soon. But to me, Halston and Ralph Lauren, two American designers that kind of put America on the map, if you will, right? When I think of American designers, instantly those are the two from the old days that I kind of think of, right? And but I don't think it's fair to say he was a great American designer, because I really think he was just one of the most influential designers of all time. Halston was one of the most influential designers of all time. And you know, from my limited understanding of fashion and design and all that stuff, it seems like he was up there with the Yves Saint Laurents and the Balenciagas and the Dior's and all that stuff, right? I mean, I would put him up there from my untrained eye with the all-time greats. So I would also go so far as to say that as far as focusing on the American designer scene, it really seems like while Ralph Lauren did build a company that, let's say, lasted a little longer and is still shining bright to this day, whereas Halston seems, like I said, very limited in its scope of current operations. I do think that when Halston's star was shining bright in the 60s, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of what initially put him on the map. If you're not familiar with it, it's a great story. Excuse me. But I also think the fact that modern American designers, like, for example, Tom Ford, so idolized Halston. One of the fashion insiders, if you will, who is very connected to fragrances and fashion, he said that Tom Ford almost idolized Halston in a way where he wanted to be Halston. He wanted to recreate what Halston had in the 70s and early 80s. And actually so much so that Tom Ford actually bought the New York house that Halston ended up living in. He bought Halston's old house. So Tom Ford, I believe, still owns that house. And so from you know, my understanding and the research I was able to do, obviously, I wasn't around in the 70s or early 80s, so I can't give you firsthand knowledge, but I can tell you that it seems to me that the sort of seeds that Halston planted are still bearing fruit to this day. And if you take a look, just on a side note, no one told me this, but I was just thinking about this for this video. Take a look at Halston's iconic bottle design, right? We'll talk a little bit about the fragrances here in a little bit, but this is Z-14. Maybe one of his most iconic masculine men's fragrance bottle designs. Look at the color, right? You notice there's no name on it. It doesn't say Halston anywhere. It's just supposed to be a work of art. The bottle itself is supposed to be a work of art. And that's why I say it's very sad these ended up at TJ Maxx for $9 or something. And I think the fragrance is worth a lot more than that as well. But if you take a look, just on a side note, this is Tom Ford's private blend bottle, okay? This is Amber Absolute. I just grabbed one. But just look at the color, right? And look at the color. You cannot tell me that there is not a sort of resemblance, let's say. I'm not going to say that Tom Ford was specifically copying Halston, but I would not be surprised if Halston had his bottle design for men had a big influence on Tom Ford's private blend bottle color choices. Okay, and these small little details to me make a big deal. I think that Tom Ford was probably paying Halston an homage, sort of a salute, if you will, because it was Z-14 that I would say moved Tom Ford to try to create a brand like this. He was that was his signature scent. We'll talk a little bit about Tom Ford's version of Z-14 as well whenever we get to the fragrances. But a very interesting quote: textures meant everything to Halston, and one of his most famous quotes, life is like a picture. So this is why I really think there's this kind of split in the way folks from different generations view Halstons. The old timers, if you're in your 70s or 80s, 60s, 70s or 80s, you remember the days when Halston was kind of seen as high-end fashion. So he got his big break in 1960s when Jackie Kennedy wore that Halston hat to JFK's inauguration. They called it like a pill hat, right? And he basically got his start selling high-end hats to rich ladies, if you will, at Bergdorf Goodman. So it was one of the first time Bergdorf Goodman ever advertised a specific designer. It was called Hats by Halston. That was his big break, right? Selling hats to rich ladies at the time. And then he started designing everything: dresses, shoes, coats, you know, ties. I even saw one thing where they were doing like rugs and the interior of car dashboards at the time, and you name it, they basically did it. In the 70s and 80s, the Halston name was huge. In 70s and early 80s, I should say, the name was kind of synonymous with high couturier fashion, high-end fashion. He was even invited to Beijing when relations with the USA were kind of just normalizing. Halston was seen as like an ambassador for his country, and I think he really took pride in that from what I saw. He was one of the first designers who wasn't of French origin to be allowed to put on a fashion show in Versailles. So, and apparently it was very well received. And that was one of the things that really put American fashion on the map, if you will. He was, and I think until the day he died, or until the day Andy died, good friends with Andy Warhol, and was described by many as one of the most naturally gifted designers of all time. So rumor is he could take a piece of fabric, make like 1 or 2 cuts, and bam, it would be like a dress on somebody. So, you know, who knows who has that type of talent, but very gifted, let's say. And when Studio 54 was a thing, rumor was in the discotheque era that, you know, it was not polo green that you smelled necessarily all over. It was Halston. It was Halston that people wore out and about, especially during the discotheque area. This was seen as like country club, high-end, you know, money. It's seen as like country club type money, right? Whereas Halston, I think, had a little bit of a different impression. It was the hip thing to wear. It was the cool thing to wear, right? So I just wanted to give you all some backstory to the brand before we kind of move on to the fragrances. But if we move on to the perfume world, the original Halston release for women from 1974, which I would love to add a bottle of that to my collection one day, high on my wish list, because it's a chypre fragrance created by the indomitable Bernard Chant. Bernard Chant is, I think, one of the greatest fragrance creators of all time, period. He's up there in the greatest perfume creators, and specifically, he loved creating chypres, and he made chypres like nobody else. I mean, he's kind of like what Roja Dove wishes he was. Bernard Chant is an absolute genius. He's a Mozart. He's a master. But, you know, before we go one by one through the fragrances, I do have to give Halston a shout out just for the original bottle that it came in. So it was funny because in the documentary, they talked a little bit. I thought it was interesting to hear. They said some of the suppliers and the high-end managers and stuff like that were kind of miffed by how much time was being spent on creating the women's bottles. A little bit different. If you just look up Halston 1974, the original one for women, you'll see the exact bottle that I'm talking about. It almost looks like a lady's neck type thing, and because of the design of the glass and everything, you couldn't fill it from the top of the bottle. You had to fill it from the bottom. So the people who made the fragrance and filled it were pissed off. They weren't happy with all the different molds he was making. He was making a lot of different molds. And so the big executives basically thought he completely lost his mind, you know. And then finally what he did that made them really think he lost the plot is he decided that he wasn't even going to put his name on the bottle. So, and if you look, do you see Halston's name anywhere on this bottle? No. Well, it was the exact same for the initial fragrance launch in 1974 for women. It didn't say Halston anywhere. It just kind of had like, there was like a ribbon or something around the outside that said Halston, but I think that could be taken off. So they thought he completely lost the plot, that he lost his mind. And, but when they saw the sales numbers, let's say they were stunned. It was one of the best selling fragrances of all time up until that point, 1974. So, okay, so let's talk about some of the perfumes in my collection. So again, this is only going to be 7 fragrances, okay? So there's only 7 fragrances here, but like I said, every single one of these is discontinued, but a lot of these, there's probably so many floating around out there that you can find pretty easily. 1 or 2 will probably be a unicorn or a little hard to find. You're going to have to do some hunting, but there are the main Halston mainstays I think you'll be able to find floating around out there pretty easily. So the first one is Halston Z-14, and if you're not familiar, these original names for the men's fragrances, Z-14 and 112, rumor has it that they were actually working names. They were the names that they were kind of given as the different iterations. So Z-14 was the final iteration that they settled on, but I'm guessing there was probably Z1, Z2, Z3, and Z-14 was the one that they finally settled on. So I will show you something very interesting though. So I've got a couple older bottles. This says Parfums Halston, but Halston being an American brand, you would think all of their fragrances were made in America, right? Well, if you take a look at the bottom of my bottle, this says made in France. Very, very interesting stuff. Made in France. And if you look at the bottom of my other Z-14 bottle, which is Halston Fragrances Inc., cologne spray for men, Halston Z-14. This one is made in the USA, New York, New York. So look at that. Very interesting. I don't understand if maybe they had different sort of places, different plants where they made these. I have no clue, but I figured it would all be made in the USA, but apparently not. So let us do a quick little sniff here. It's been a while since I've sniffed this. And I will tell you that I really do believe that one of the reasons why Halston Z-14 is going to get a Hall of Fame video from me is that I think this fragrance was so influential as far as, fragrances that it inspired, let's say. Fragrances, I don't want to say they copied Z-14, but even in modern niche world, if you will. So if you take something like Clive Christian's X, which came out in the year 2000, I believe. If you take Roja's Reckless Eau de Parfum or Parfum, Pure Parfum, which both are discontinued now as well, the two Roja iterations, I think Clive Christian X is still around. You can still buy that. If you take something like Tom Ford's Italian Cypress. Italian Cypress is probably one of the closest to Z-14 I ever came across, and that's because, and there is a review on the channel of Italian Cypress if you want to dive a little bit deeper into that, but this was, this was Tom Ford's signature scent. This is what he liked to wear, from my understanding, in the late 70s and 80s. He loved it so much, he basically created his own version of Z-14, called it Italian Cypress, and it is beautiful, to be fair. It is very... it's very competently made. Does it deserve high-end Tom Ford prices when you can get Z-14? That's the big question. I don't know. I don't know if it adds enough on top of what you're smelling. Ditto for Roja's Apex. Roja's Apex, I think, borrows a lot from this. It adds a little modern pineapple fruitiness. It's nothing like Aventus, though. Don't worry. It's much closer to Z-14. But I also reviewed Apex Eau de Parfum on the channel. You can check that out. So this will definitely get a Vintage Hall of Fame review. The cinnamon in this is really striking. You know, sometimes, depending on the weather, it can smell dusty and dry, and sometimes it can also smell a little bit like Big Red cinnamon, like Big Red cinnamon chewing gum, if you will. But the cypress in here is amazing. There's cypress, there's lemon, there's bergamot, basil, gardenia, coriander, geranium, jasmine, vetiver, moss. And that's the thing is, I think if you smell different versions of this, different iterations, right? Because it did stay on the market for so long. I think this was only discontinued a year or two ago. I don't think this has been discontinued for long. But, you know, it's got a little bit of that ambery, benzoin, leather, dry down. It was created by two all-star perfumers, Vincent Marcello and Max Gavari, who I think Max Gavari's son went on to be a perfumer as well. Sometimes it can turn a little bit slightly smoky, slightly spicy, slightly woody, well, very woody. But that cinnamon is one of the things that really grabs you, you know, to me. And this scent is just an icon. I mean, it inspired so much, like I said, and that didn't even, all of those scents I mentioned, didn't even mention something like Vendetta Pour Homme by Valentino. This is heavily inspired by Z-14. So, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on. The rabbit hole is very deep to discover. And that's one of the things I love about fragrances is if you think you know everything, you don't. You know, there's so much to learn in this game, in the fragrance game, if you will. So much to smell, so much to explore. Really gives you something to do. It's a fantastic hobby, especially while you're going through the day. You can just smell your scent of the day, break it down mentally, make notes. You know, it's the best hobby a man or a woman can have, in my opinion. But this is definitely not a $9 TJ Maxx fragrance. I absolutely love this stuff. I love the backstory. I love the So I will say there is some disagreement on the release date. Parfumo shows 1976 for Z-14, and they also show 1976 for the next fragrance we're going to discuss, which is called 112. And so 112 comes in basically the exact same bottle. This is a little bigger bottle, so but it's the same exact bottle. And the only way to tell is on the bottom. You'll see Halston 112, cologne, natural spray cologne for men. This is Halston Fragrances, Inc., New York, New York, 10036, I think. Okay, so really that's the only way to tell. You won't be able to tell just by looking at the bottle because 112 shares the exact same bottle as Z-14. And so this is a little more to the fougere side of things. It's spicy, it's green, it's got this galbanum note which separates it, and lots of pine. So this is a couple years before, if I recall, a couple years before Polo Green, okay? But this is pine, lavender, and this beautiful old school carnation, which I love. I love the spicy greenness. The greenness of the carnation really pops here. And it blends beautifully with the green resinous galbanum. So, you know, the basil, some of the citruses, the ambers and stuff like that, they share some similarity with Z-14, but really 112 is its own fragrance. It's much more to the fougere green side of things. Beautiful masculine fragrance, very professional up and down. You know, I think Z-14 would be more of that. I think about Z-14 more of like the discotheque clubbing scent. It's hard for me at 39 in 2024 to imagine the discotheques in the 70s, right? Or early 80s. But I don't see 112 as a party scent. I see more 112 as the office scent, Z-14 more as the party scent. Although I do think Z-14 works beautifully in the office as well. That could be both, but 112 is much more the professional scent to me, in my opinion. I still really enjoy it. I think it's great. I think it's overlooked. And again, very sad all of these are discontinued. But yes, 112 and a beautiful lavender. Like if you want an example of a beautiful old school lavender, slightly green, like I said, textured. I was talking about Halston loving textures early on. That was in his documentary. Beautifully textured lavender. Absolutely love it. Love these old school Halston scents from the 70s and early 80s. Okay. Excuse me whilst I hydrate. Today's drink of the day is bourbon flavored tea, believe it or not. It's damn good too. I think Harney & Sons is the one who makes this tea. Really good. Okay, so next on the list we have the new edition that sparked me to do this video. And again, thank you to Frank, because I've seen bottles of this going online for $250 to $500. I mean, it depends on where you look. It's very, very hard to find. I don't know if it's just because it didn't last long, and so there's just not many bottles out there. I have no clue why this is such a unicorn, but if you said, Ramsey, what is the hardest Halston to find? Unfortunately, it's this. And I wore it yesterday, and I have to tell you, it is absolutely beautiful. It is very hard to describe, though. I was really racking my brain to think about how I would describe it in this video to you guys, and it's almost like, if you can imagine in your head what something very aromatic and herbal smells like, and the hard part is transferring that herbalness from, you're probably thinking things like thyme and, basil and oreganos. Like, think about the way that would add this aromatic type smell, and then just transfer that over to like a spicy smell. So I think there is a ton of clary sage in Halston 101. That's my guess. But look at this beautiful bottle, okay? Well, first of all, here's the packaging. And you can see the short ingredient list. Halston Enterprises. Halston and 101 are trademarks of Halston Enterprises, Inc. And Halston Fragrances, Inc. Awesome. Code 5001-11. No clue what that means, but look at this bottle. This bottle is absolutely badass in my opinion. So the box basically opens up like this. So the top doesn't actually come, comes like this, okay? And then it opens here, and there's the bottle. Look at this. So almost like the Z-14 bottle is like a blood cell like bottle with the crimp here, so it's easier to grab so you can pour it or whatever, right? This also has some places almost like it's for your fingers, like a joystick, you know? And look, it has a thumb, it has a place for your thumb as well. Look at that. So the thumb fits perfectly here, the finger's here, and you can just splash it, you know, but this is actually a spray. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is a splash. So this is actually perfectly made for splashing. And that's how most men's fragrances were back then. Apparently, I have it on good authority. Many men back in the day saw spraying as like prissy, you know, as something men don't spray fragrances, right? It's like something like you wouldn't admit that to your guy buddy that you sprayed your perfume on. You splashed your fragrances on, right? That's how they did it back in the day. So this bottle is like perfectly attuned to splashing. Look at that. It's just perfect. And the thumb. So it's like, bam, it's made for the hand. I mean, I don't know if I've ever held a bottle that is so perfectly made for the hand. And the smell is this woody, spicy, shit ton of clary sage, which I think gives off this slightly leathery, but very pissy, dusty, dry, aromatic-like feel, okay? Again, beautiful lavender. The lavender in here may be even more beautiful than 112. And the geranium adds to that green, spicy. Geranium is very spicy in and of itself. Geranium and carnation are two of the spiciest florals. There is a bay leaf note in here as well. There is some pine, but I think the star of the show is the clary sage, the thyme, and then it kind of dries down to this weird mixture of musk, cedarwood, amber, and leather, okay? With oak moss, tree moss, as they say, oak moss, tree moss. And they claim there's real ambergris in here, but they have ambergris in the top. And I think the ambergris in the top is what makes it seem so weird. It's a very strange fragrance, okay? I'll tell you that. It's very hard to describe, but I love it. I absolutely loved wearing Halston 101. I decanted, 10 mils or whatever it was into a decanter, and I was wearing it. I didn't splash all this on in one day, don't worry. But yes, real ambergris, lots of clary sage. Lavender is much sharper here than in 112. The lavender in 101 has a little bit of a scratchy, almost like you have Velcro and the one side of the Velcro is a little bit scratchy. That's a little bit what the lavender feels like in here. But the geranium is, I mean, I would almost venture to say one of the best clary sages I've smelled, one of the best geraniums I've smelled in here. It's fantastic stuff. And I totally see why there are some folks who go crazy for this, because if you wore this every day and people associated this smell with you, this is so unique. It is one of the most unique fragrances. I don't think I've ever smelled a fragrance that smells like this before. I mean, there's nothing I can really compare it to, and I've smelled thousands of fragrances. There's nothing I can compare it to. The one thing that I will say, for coming out in the early 80s, it doesn't have the big, brash, Koros, Antaeus. It doesn't have that. It does have, ambergris is a slightly animalic feel. It's an animalic note by itself. It comes from an animal, but it's not as harsh or as powerful as castoreum or civet or something like that. It's almost like it works as like a spotlight note. It spotlights some of the other notes. Like you can feel ambergris's, you can feel its presence sometimes more than you can just smell ambergris. And the other thing is, it's very similar with lavender sometimes. Sometimes with lavender, it's like you can feel lavender's presence, but you can't really smell it. Both of those things are true in this one. And so it really highlights these aromatic notes, which I don't want to say they feel ethereal, but they feel, the fragrance, even though it has amber and leather and stuff like that in the base, it never goes truly into this hardcore leather. It's almost like the clary sage gives it a little bit of a leathery feel, but it's very aromatic, and it probably lasts 6 to 7 hours. I mean, it wasn't a huge performer. I mean, I know that's enough. That's a whole workday, basically, almost. So it'll get you through a workday. But it wasn't like some of the 80s fragrances where it's just like a giant beast mode. But I still really love it, and I need to wear... I only wore it once. Well, I just got it, but I only wore it once, so I will be wearing that, and that will definitely be getting a review on the channel one of these days. So again, this is not a ranked list. This is just some of the Halston fragrances in a family portrait. So Halston 101 is the true unicorn of the bunch, but maybe my favorite Halston, and I have yet to find anything that is going to dissuade me from this. But moving on, so we started in 76 with Z-14 and 112. We went to 1983 with Halston 101, and now we're going to go to 1987, and this is called Halston Limited. Now, Halston Limited, I reviewed this off of a mini that Frank sent me that had a... There was a blurb in here, and I'm kind of pissed off it's not in here anymore. Well, I should be pissed at myself, but you can see I wore a little bit of this bad. This was, by the way, this was a gift. Look what they used to give as gifts back in the day. Gift, not for sale. Look at this. This was like a 7.5 mil mini. That's what they used to give as gifts. Now they fight you to give you 1 mil sample or something in some shitty tube that doesn't even have a sprayer, you know? So, the good old days. But this is 1987. This is more, it's almost like Halston at this point in 1987 saw what was going on in the 80s, and they were like, we're going to get in on this. This is Halston's heaviest fragrance, by far, by far. Halston Limited is the heaviest of the bunch. It's aldehydes, artemisia, basil, bergamot, green notes, patchouli, rose, clove, coriander, jasmine, vetiver, frankincense, iris, benzoin, castoreum, musk, tonka bean, amber, cistus, leather, and moss. So definitely the heaviest of the bunch. If you're a fan of old school 80s fragrances because you like the way that you like heavy fragrances, you like fragrances that feel heavy on the nose, you like fragrances that have a lot of oak moss and castoreum, and they're animalic and leathery and big and bold, this is your Halston. This is absolutely your Halston. This is the one. Oh, this stuff is oh, for somebody who loves the type of fragrances that I love, Halston Limited is where it's at. And what's crazy is it's so under the radar. So under the radar. So you can see they kept the sort of pinched bottle, right? But they added this silver kind of thing. And actually, when I had the blurb in the mini, I read it. So if you go to my Halston Limited review and watch it, which, of course, these sort of vintage discontinued fragrances that few people talk about don't get very much love. Even on a channel like mine where I talk about vintage fragrances, sometimes they just don't get the views. But if you go watch my Halston Limited review, I actually read the little blurb. This is absolutely... This is right up the Ram's alley. It's like Halston made a fragrance for me, is really what Halston Limited smells like to me. I absolutely love it. The spicy sort of animalic touches blend with a little bit of that slightly sweetened amber, but not too sweet. You know, there's just a little bit of amber generally will be a sweeter note. But it just adds a little bit of that, you know, heft and depth. And I love this stuff. Absolutely love it. And the texture, again, you can really feel the texture. So, okay, so that is Halston Limited from 1987. Now we're going to jump all the way to 1994. And all of these, again, sadly discontinued. Here I actually have both. I have the aftershave, which I'll show you, and I've got the actual eau de toilette. This is Halston Catalyst for Men. So 1994... Catalyst for Men comes out, and the perfumer is Elias Armendis, who is maybe one of the more underrated perfumers, and Harry Fremont, who I absolutely love. Harry Fremont did Michael for Men, and he had his hand in Tuscan Leather, and I mean, just an all-star perfumer. But he did Catalyst, and Catalyst is maybe one of the more complex fragrances that you will ever come across. And it was another one that you could find at discounters for very, very cheap for the longest time. Not anymore. Now people are trying to sell bottles for $200, $300, $400. But Catalyst is... Okay. And the bottle kind of leaks every time I spray it, so it kind of sucks. But nothing I can do about that. So, but Catalyst is Oh yeah, baby. So it is sharp, spicy from the beginning. It has all kind of things in the beginning, which what makes this so interesting is in the 90s, you know, things were already starting to turn fresh. In the late 80s, even, you had Cool Water and stuff like that, right? New West by Aramis. So Halston knew the way that the winds were shifting at this time, but they still decided to put something like this out, which I think still has more of a foot in the 80s than in the coming 90s. The wave in the 90s that came and washed everything away hasn't washed stuff like this away yet. So there's sage, basil, tarragon, one of my secret ingredients, lavender, jasmine, caraway, galbanum, tuberose, bergamot, mandarin orange, mint, narcissus, orange, vodka, and rose. That's just the top. The heart is nutmeg, chamomile, cinnamon, grass, so probably some vetiver combination, bay leaf, black currant, geranium, lily of the valley, violet, and rose. The base is frankincense, labdanum, leather, oak moss, benzoin, cedar, tonka bean, amber, musk, patchouli, sandalwood, vetiver, and castoreum. Just a little bit of castoreum. So it opens up spicy and minty and sort of bright and fresh at the same time. But it very quickly turns into this almost like an animalic floral. But the cinnamon in here adds the warmth, of course. The black currant adds a little bit of fruitiness. There's violet, there's rose. The frankincense is slightly spicy. And you know what it reminds me of? Not in smell, but in almost like structure, like the idea behind it. If you've ever smelled this little bad boy, Antidote by Viktor and Rolf. Now again, they don't smell the same, but the reason I'm pulling out Antidote is when I describe Antidote, Antidote is one of those fragrances that feels like it has a little bit of everything. Like it has citruses, it has spices, it has florals, it has ambers, it has leather, it has all these different kind of notes, and it depends on the weather and what pops off on your skin. Catalyst is a lot like that. There's a vodka note in here, so it's boozy, but it's not just a boozy fragrance. It's fruity from the blackcurrant, but it's not just a fruity fragrance. It's you know, there's that vetiver grass-like feel. It's minty, it's fresh. There's citruses, there's galbanum. It's green, but it's not really just a green fragrance. It's musky, it's got patchouli, it's got a little bit of animalics with the castoreum in the base, and you know, the labdanum and frankincense and leather, but it's not just a labdanum leather, you know, it's not just an amber, it's not just a leather, it just kind of does everything. And it just depends on the complexity. And remember, this is a designer. Well, both of these, Antidote and this, was a designer. This is squarely in the niche fragrance realm today. Designers would not dare. They wouldn't even think about releasing a fragrance like this. Speaking of designers not even thinking about getting close to this, look at the aftershave, by the way. This is courtesy of, oh shit, I forgot who sent this to me. It may have been Anuj at Enchante, but I can't remember. If it wasn't Anuj, I greatly apologize. But check this out. Check this out. So this is the aftershave. Look at the two-tone, okay? Look at the separation. Now, so you can mix it up, right? And then watch, it separates again. Now, this was all marketed as like a chemistry set. So this is supposed to be a beaker. There was like one of the smaller ones for the 10 mil mini or whatever. It was like a smaller version of a chemistry set. This obviously has that chemistry-like, you know, design. And what a design. I mean, absolutely one of the most unique fragrance designs. And I miss the days that fragrance companies would do stuff like this. I just think this is cool. And I think it shows time and effort that they put into it instead of just sticking it all. No offense to Tom Ford, but he's one of the biggest offenders at just sticking everything in the same damn bottle and changing the label. And I understand it saves on the mold, it saves on cost, but when you're spending $300 or $400 a bottle, how much do you really need to save? Can't they spend an extra 20 bucks and have a new bottle, a new idea every time? Obviously not. It's too much to ask, but the good old days, even the 90s were still the good old days. So yes, check that out. I love it. I think it's fantastic. So Catalyst will be getting a review one of these days on the channel. And then we've got 2 more left, and these 2 are kind of the newer age Halston fragrances. The next one is called Halston Z. So they dropped the Z-14, or I'm guessing that's where the name came from, and now it's just Halston Z. This was 1998, so this is like new age Halston stuff, right? And it was supposed to be very citrusy and fresh. So 1998 was the heart of the aquatic era. Aqua de Jo completely took off, and you can see they kind of are really marketing that Z. And look at the bottle. That'll tell you all you need to know. Look, it's clear, it's fresh, it's almost like an aquatic without being an aquatic though, and it's probably my least favorite Halston, to be honest with you. It's probably my least favorite. I only got a chance to try it once or so before bed, but I remember thinking, I mean, I do like how the base has some leather and oak moss and amber and benzoin, maybe a little in the realm of what am I thinking? I am thinking maybe a little bit of Boss Elements in there, maybe just a little bit, but more like a fresher version. Not an aquatic, but there's definitely a freshness to this here. So I'll wear this, give it a proper wear, and actually talk about it on the channel one of these days. But again, discontinued from 1998. Halston Z. I have no clue who the perfumer is. And finally, the newest edition, which again, I didn't know what this was because there is no name on the bottle. So Halston stays true to not putting his name. Actually, all of these, you notice the Halston 101, no name, Halston Limited, no name on the bottle, and even Catalyst just says Catalyst. It doesn't say Halston anywhere. It just says Catalyst. So you can see his bottles were meant to be a little bit of a work of art. But again, this one made it very hard for me because there was no name, and the writing on the bottom is in micro print. I had to take a picture and zoom in on it. It's called Unbound for Men. So Halston Unbound for Men came out in 2002, and it's a spicy, fruity fragrance with blackcurrant, palm leaf, tomato leaf, which I have to admit, I did have a chance to put this on before bed, and I'm not going to do it now, but I was relatively impressed. I think I liked it a little bit better than Z. Interesting, spicy thing going on with some cardamom, sage, pimento, and coriander. Coriander can come across as very dry, but the fruitiness was pretty amped up. And sandalwood into the dry down, and nutmeg and oak moss and stuff like that. So yes, Unbound is maybe the most playful of the Halstons I've ever smelled. Probably definitely the most playful, actually, but I still liked it. I enjoyed it. And there's not many really good tomato leaf fragrances. So, Trussardi L'Uomo, I believe, is one. And What About Adam is probably my favorite tomato or tomato leaf. But this is not a bad one either. So, Unbound for Men. So you'll be hearing more about the House of Halston. I don't think I've done any individual reviews, so I'm glad to at least get the family portrait out of the way. Once I've done some of these reviews, I'll come back and rank this family portrait, because then this is unranked, so I'll come back and rank them. But I think this house deserves a spotlight. It deserves to be discussed in the fragrance community. It's a house that, one or two different turns, and they could have been the modern Tom Ford. Honestly, they really could have. It just depended on a roll of the dice here, a decision there, and how everything played out. And it's it's really almost like watching the rise and fall of America, like I said, because Halston decided to sign, for those of you who didn't watch the documentary, he basically signed a $1 billion deal with JCPenney, okay, in the early 80s, I believe. Maybe late 70s, but early 80s, I think. And he tried to bring high-end fashion to the masses, was the idea. So, and I personally, my opinion, is that it destroyed the brand, because folks in that rarefied air, the bourgeoisie, the folks who were the Jackie Kennedys of the 80s, right? Jackie Kennedy with her pillbox hat put him on the scene, but that group of people, they didn't want to be wearing what the masses were wearing, even if you said, well, it's two completely different lines, different styles, different material. They don't care. They don't want the name of what the masses are wearing, in my opinion. I know it sounds bougie, the bourgeoisie, but I think that's what happened. And they wanted their own line just for the rich. And when Halston signed that deal with JCPenney, people like Bergdorf Goodman dropped him. They literally stopped carrying his products, and other high-end stores followed suit and started kind of cutting back on their orders. So sales dropped, and other new names started to come in. Calvin Klein was really big on the rise and stuff like that. And then there was this huge beef between Halston and S-Mark, who owned Tampax at the time. And there was a funny story that Halston used to say the folks from Planet Tampax landed on Planet Halston. And they ended up kicking Halston out of his own company. Actually, they said, "Sorry, we bought your rights. We basically don't need you anymore." And they just kicked this great mind out of his own company, which I think was another sort of one of those big X's on the company. And, it was almost like he tried to take something that was meant for the elites and he tried to give it to the masses. And it was almost like the elites turned on him for that. And he sadly died a recluse. Well, he was among family, but when he died in 1990, he didn't want to be around people. He didn't show his face in public. He just kind of kept to himself until the end. And so it's a sad ending to a beautiful story, but his legacy lives on. American designers live on. I honestly believe Tom Ford owes a lot to Roy Halston Fragrances. So this family portrait is to kind of shine a light on a house that really is very limited in scope right now. The new age folks aren't on YouTube bragging about Halston. I'll tell you that. They're not flexing their Halston collection. I promise you that. They're not. But one of the reasons I love this game, this fragrance game, is it's a never-ending journey, not just of smelling new things, learning about new things, but also learning about the history and what came before. And Halston is a house that if you're a true frag head, you must get your nose on these, okay? I don't say anything is a must-buy anymore because I know there's some people out there who get offended by everything nowadays. You used the wrong word, that kind of crap. But I will say it is a must sniff. In order to really understand the history of American fragrances, Ralph Lauren, Halston, these type of brands are must sniffs. You have to get your nose on some of these, even if it's just once. It's one of those things I really feel like if you're doing your due diligence and exploration of the past, if you're a true fragrance lover, these should be on the list. So anyways, that is my Halston family portrait. Thank you, everybody, as always, for watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, all the stuff you do. When we get to 10,000 subscribers or 1,000 videos, whichever comes first, I'm going to do an entire collection live stream one day. It's going to be an all-day thing. We'll go through every single fragrance, quick blurb, and I'm also going to re-rank my top 100 one of these days. So amazing list to come still. But as always, I appreciate everyone's support. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.